Nathan Cruz was a ghost in the system. Malik Rhoades was the fire on the street, and together, they built the most dangerous gang empire America had never seen. But when ambition clashed with paranoia, their empire didn't just collapse. It detonated, leaving a trail of bodies, secrets, and a chilling truth. The war never ended. It just disappeared underground. East Denver had always been a city of contrasts. Quiet suburbs a few blocks from neighborhoods scarred by crime. A place where opportunity and struggle lived side by side. It was in this forgotten corner of the city that a new gang quietly emerged. They called themselves the Red Vultures. At first, no one noticed them. There were no flashy shootouts or chaotic street brawls. There were no spray-painted tags screaming their name. But that was exactly the point. The Red Vultures weren't after attention. They were after control. Nathan Cruz, known to his crew as Ghost, was the architect of the Red Vultures. Just 24 years old, he was different from the usual gang leader. He didn't dress flashy, didn't drive expensive cars, and didn't flood his social media with threats or trophies. He moved silently, made decisions like a chess master, and trusted only a tight circle. Nathan had grown up in East Denver, watching older gangs burn themselves out with impulsive violence and turf wars that left bodies in the street and no real power behind. He promised himself he would build something smarter. It started small. Nathan offered protection to street dealers who were tired of being robbed. He charged a fee and guaranteed peace. Then he moved on to small businesses, auto shops, pawn stores, smoke lounges, any place that made unregulated cash. He didn't demand loyalty. He demanded silence. If someone refused, they weren't threatened. They simply vanished. No police reports, no rumors, just empty apartments and missed phone calls. Word spread fast. By the end of 2016, the Red Vultures controlled a dozen city blocks without firing a single public shot. But Nathan knew power didn't last without structure. He created layers. Beneath him were 5 lieutenants, each responsible for specific zones. They handled collection, kept local disputes quiet, and managed the lower ranks. Nathan also recruited outsiders, tech-savvy kids who could monitor police, chatter, crack into city databases, and track who was watching. He even had someone inside a local courier company who tipped him off about any incoming packages flagged by law enforcement. Things stayed quiet for a while, just how Nathan liked it. The Red Vultures grew rich and invisible, but silence never lasts in the underworld. In the summer of 2017, something changed. A gang called the Iron Dogs arrived. They didn't sneak in, they kicked the door down. The Iron Dogs were brutal, loud, and impossible to ignore. They were led by Malik Rhoades, a 36-year-old ex-con who had spent more than a decade behind bars in California. Malik believed in power through fear. His crew drove modified muscle cars, carried military-grade weapons, and painted their symbol, a snarling dog skull, on every surface they touched. Malik wanted East Denver, and he didn't care who already owned it. Within weeks of arriving, the Iron Dogs had taken control of 3 Red Vultures blocks. A series of brazen daylight robberies shocked the neighborhood. Red Vultures lieutenants began dying. One found shot in his car, another drowned in a warehouse sink. Nathan Cruz said nothing. He didn't retaliate. He didn't call meetings. He simply disappeared. This silence caused unease among the Red Vultures. Some believed Nathan had been killed, others thought he had run. Without him, the organization began to crack. Some lieutenants tried to hold the ground, others fled. The Iron Dogs took more territory, and the violence escalated. A police precinct reported a 78% increase in gang-related shootings over 3 months. The media called it a gang war. Officials claimed they had it under control. But on the streets, no one felt safe. Nathan's disappearance became the biggest mystery. He had built an empire in shadows and left no trail behind. No fingerprints, no bank accounts, no social media. There was no body, no goodbye, just silence. But those who knew him best didn't believe he was gone. They believed he was waiting, watching, planning something deeper than anyone could see. The war between the Iron Dogs and the Red Vultures raged on, but beneath it, something darker was forming, something larger than either gang had ever imagined. Nathan Cruz hadn't lost. He had simply stepped back to build something no one could stop. The streets didn't know it yet, but they weren't just part of a turf battle. They were standing on the edge of an empire, and the ghost that built it was far from gone. Nathan Cruz's disappearance created more than confusion. It created a vacuum. Without him, the Red Vultures began to fracture from within. His silence was not just an absence of orders. It was the loss of the gang's structure. The lieutenants, once tightly controlled under his system, turned on one another. Suspicion crept in. Some believed that Nathan had faked his own death to escape with the money. Others whispered he had been killed by Malik Rhoades and that his body had been buried in one of the vacant construction zones on the outskirts of the city. No one had answers, and fear filled the gaps where his leadership used to be. Malik, sensing the weakness, launched a full-scale offensive. In a matter of weeks, the Iron Dogs expanded beyond East Denver into neighboring districts, forcing rival gangs to either join or disappear. His reputation grew into legend. Residents who once whispered about the Red Vultures now feared the Iron Dogs openly. Malik didn't just take over blocks, he torched them, leaving a trail of destruction and graffiti in every corner. The dog skull symbol became a warning, smeared across garages, schools, and even police stations. It was no longer about territory, it was about domination. But in the middle of this chaos, one person didn't lose sight of the bigger picture. Detective Lena Graves, a quiet but relentless investigator in the Denver Gang Task Force, had followed Nathan Cruz's trail for nearly 5 years. Unlike her colleagues, she wasn't convinced he was gone. She studied Nathan's past decisions, his behavior, and the structure he had built. To her, the way he disappeared didn't feel like panic or defeat. It felt deliberate. Lena reopened cold surveillance files and requested access to federal logs. She traced old burner phone data, dug through encrypted messages left behind in seized devices, and looked for patterns that might signal Nathan's survival. It wasn't easy. His fingerprints weren't in any database. His face hadn't appeared on any traffic camera in months. The only image they had was a grainy photo from 2 years earlier, taken by a drone during a narcotics sting. It showed him standing in a crowd, his face turned slightly, eyes hidden behind dark glasses. Weeks passed. Lena's search went nowhere. Then, without warning, an envelope arrived on her desk with no return address. Inside it was a single photograph and a burner phone with no contacts or messages. The photograph showed a high-end hotel suite in Miami. Sitting on the couch was Malik Rhoades, dressed in designer clothes, drinking from a crystal glass. Across from him, slightly turned away from the camera but unmistakable, was Nathan Cruz. The photo changed everything. It shattered the idea that Nathan had fled or been killed. Instead, it suggested something far more dangerous: cooperation. Enemies didn't meet in luxury hotels. They met in alleys with guns drawn. Lena's instincts screamed that something larger was in motion. She dug deeper. A few weeks before Nathan disappeared, there had been an unrecorded private flight out of Colorado, later traced to a shell company tied to a former Red Vultures associate. Around the same time, several known Iron Dogs operatives stopped appearing on police radars. Informants were too afraid to talk, but one name came up repeatedly: the Rain. The Rain wasn't a gang, it was something new, a merger, a syndicate, a criminal network that went beyond streets and corners. It had no colors, no tags, and no known headquarters. It was invisible. But money started moving differently, quicker, cleaner, through channels that didn't exist before. A barbershop in Denver was suddenly handling wire transfers. A failing trucking business in Utah doubled its revenue overnight. Businesses popped up across the country, all unremarkable on the surface, but all connected in quiet, deliberate ways. Lena began tracking these connections, creating a map. What she saw shocked her. Nathan and Malik weren't just teaming up, they were building a criminal empire across state lines. The violence, the war, the chaos, it had been a cover. While the city watched bullets fly, the real power was being built behind closed doors, between two men who had fooled everyone. What was more terrifying than their unity was how clean it was. Nathan handled the infrastructure, digital security, and financial layers. Malik handled the enforcement, the intimidation, and the message. Together they operated without drawing attention. It wasn't about gang pride or neighborhood respect anymore. It was about absolute control. Lena Graves knew that the streets of Denver had changed. The gangs weren't fighting for blocks anymore. They were fighting to stay relevant in a world where power no longer wore colors or shouted from rooftops. It whispered. It moved in silence. And at its center were two men who had once been enemies, but now stood together as the architects of something far more dangerous than anyone could see. By the start of 2018, Denver's gang scene had undergone a transformation. What once were turf wars, scattered shootings, and messy alliances had been replaced by eerie quiet. To outsiders, it seemed as if law enforcement had finally won. Crime? Reports dropped, gang activity slowed, and violent arrests declined. But for those who paid closer attention, like Detective Lena Graves, the silence wasn't a sign of peace. It was a mask, hiding something much darker. The rain. The silent. Network co-created by Nathan Cruz and Malik Rhoades had moved past Denver. Their influence spread like an invisible web across the Midwest, reaching cities like Kansas City, St. Louis, and even stretching to smaller towns. From tattoo parlors to tow truck companies, they created a chain of seemingly ordinary businesses that served as nodes of a growing empire. Each business laundered money, stored weapons, or served as a meeting point for members of the organization. These weren't traditional gang members anymore. They looked like everyday citizens, delivery, drivers, clerks, even teachers. But they were part of something far more sophisticated than a street crew. Nathan remained unseen. His new identity, crafted by tech-savvy recruits, erased his past completely. Even facial recognition software struggled to find him. Malik, in contrast, embraced his role as the public face. He visited clubs, made connections with local politicians, and even attended charity events in other states. His transformation from violent gang leader to business consultant was disturbingly effective. Lena watched it unfold with increasing frustration. She had submitted multiple reports warning of a new, organized syndicate growing across state lines. But the lack of violent outbursts made it difficult to convince higher-ups that a threat still existed. Without blood in the streets, there were no headlines. Without headlines, there was no urgency. Then came the Wichita incident. In April 2018, 3 men were found dead in a warehouse just outside Wichita, Kansas. At first glance, it looked like a robbery gone wrong, broken locks, missing inventory, and a scorched car nearby. But the victims weren't random. All 3 were former lieutenants of the Iron Dogs who had reportedly split from Malik shortly after the rain formed. No cameras had caught the killers, and there were no fingerprints. But one clue remained, a symbol carved into the inside wall of the warehouse. A small, inverted crown. It was the first visual calling card ever linked to the rain. Lena saw it for what it was, a message. Not to the police, but to anyone thinking about defecting from the organization. Betrayal was no longer punished with loud gunfire. It was quiet, efficient, and final. Despite the growing sophistication, cracks began to form within the empire. Malik's desire for visibility started clashing with Nathan's obsession with staying in the shadows. Nathan wanted the rain to operate like a machine, quiet, smooth, invisible. Malik, on the other hand, was hungry for power and validation. He began speaking to people he shouldn't have, forming relationships with unstable crews in Chicago and Detroit. He started spending money recklessly, drawing attention to businesses tied to their network. Nathan responded by pulling back access. Certain accounts were frozen. High-level operations were delayed. This shift angered Malik, who saw it as betrayal. Their alliance had been strong because of their differences, but now those differences had become weapons. Meanwhile, Lena made her move. She quietly partnered with a cybersecurity analyst named Morgan Tate, who had experience uncovering dark web financial activity. Together, they tracked a series of transactions that led to an offshore account registered under a falsified Honduran passport. The name on the passport was meaningless, but the account's digital signature matched a burner device seized 2 years earlier from a Red Vulture's stash house. They had found a crack in Nathan's armor. Lena and Morgan traced more patterns, quietly passing the data to a trusted federal prosecutor. Within weeks, a sealed investigation was opened. But timing was everything. Just as the investigation gained traction, an internal power struggle within the reign exploded. In August 2018, Malik's top enforcer, Derek Bones Hawkins, was found dead in his hotel room in Las Vegas. No signs of forced entry, no drugs, just a clean gunshot to the head and a missing laptop. The murder was never officially tied to the reign, but those who knew the streets saw it clearly. Nathan had struck first. The empire they built together was now at war with itself. And while law enforcement scrambled to keep up, the two men who started it all prepared to destroy everything they had built, each for his own reasons. By the end of 2018, what had started as a unified criminal empire began to collapse from within. The reign, once praised in whispers for its efficiency and feared for its brutality, was now a fractured kingdom. With Derek Hawkins dead and Malik Rhoades growing increasingly paranoid, the balance of power shifted. Malik, once a calculated tactician, became erratic. He stopped attending meetings, cut off his own allies, and changed locations every few days. His fear was not just of the police, it was of Nathan Cruz. Nathan, always the ghost in the system, had retreated deeper into the shadows. He made no public appearances, no known communications, and yet his presence lingered over every decision. Files disappeared. Surveillance footage went missing. Anyone who questioned his role in the reign's recent chaos either vanished or was found with a single bullet to the head. Nathan had moved beyond control. He had become the silence before destruction. Malik's paranoia reached its peak when he attempted to stage a coup. He tried to seize full access to the reign's financial network using a former tech associate, bribed with promises of protection and power. But Nathan had anticipated the betrayal. The associate never made it to the data center. His car was found burning beneath a freeway bridge outside Phoenix. Inside, investigators found a phone with only one message on the screen. Some thrones burn. This message sent shockwaves through the remnants of the reign. Members who once swore loyalty, Malik now questioned his future. Some defected to smaller gangs, others fled the country. Nathan, operating through proxies and encrypted systems, began dismantling operations he had built himself. Laundering fronts were shut down, cash lines were cut off. Entire branches of the organization went dark overnight. It wasn't just retaliation, it was demolition. Lena Graves watched the implosion unfold with measured urgency. She had collected enough evidence to build federal indictments, but she knew that once one part of the empire was touched, the rest would scatter. The time to strike was now. In December 2018, she presented her full case to a joint task force. The scale shocked even veteran agents. Over 30 businesses across 8 states, over 200 operatives, and nearly $70 million laundered through legitimate and fake businesses alike. But even as warrants were drafted and arrests planned, Lena felt uneasy. The one person who could unravel it all, Nathan, was still missing. He had removed himself from the system he created so thoroughly that even federal tracking tools couldn't locate him. Malik, however, was more vulnerable. In early January 2019, a raid was conducted on a luxury home in Atlanta. Inside, officers found over $1.2 million in cash, multiple unregistered weapons, and Malik Rhoades himself, sleep-deprived, drunk, and alone. He offered no resistance. He simply sat in silence as agents cuffed him. But even in custody, he said nothing. No names, no locations, no clues. Lena visited him days later. Sitting across from her in an interrogation room, Malik stared straight. Ahead, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. The only words he spoke were chilling. "You don't find Nathan, he finds you." Over the next few months, over 100 individuals were arrested in connection to the rain. Businesses were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. For the public, it looked like victory. News outlets declared the end of one of America's most advanced criminal networks. Politicians praised law enforcement. Lena received commendations. But in private, she wasn't celebrating. The man at the center of it all remained a phantom. Every attempt to trace him ended in silence. When investigators tried to decrypt files linked to Nathan's operations, they found nothing but corrupted drives and self-deleting programs. He had designed the fall from the beginning. When the rain no longer served his purpose, he buried it. Rumors continued. Some said Nathan fled to Europe, using a forged identity. Others claimed he never left America, and now lived as a tech investor, hiding in plain sight. A few believed he was dead. Lena didn't believe any of them. To her, Nathan Cruz was never just a gang leader. He was an architect of silence, someone who understood power not as noise but as absence. And until the day he resurfaced, if he ever did, there would be no real closure. The streets grew quieter, the names changed, but the shadows that Nathan had shaped remained. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous empires are the ones you never see coming, and the most terrifying criminals are the ones who vanish without leaving a trace.